What's up, everybody? I'm Stan, and welcome to Detail Comics, where we go over comics in detail. This is iRate Reviews, the show where I go over a comic book, its art, its story, give you my impressions, and let you know whether it's something to go back to the shop for or not. I'm going to be talking about Venom number 2. So Venom number 2 continues on in a story that a lot of people didn't necessarily feel was necessary, because what we see is that Venom has separated itself from Flash Gordon, and he's no longer a Space Knight, he's now on Earth, and in the possession of Lee Price, which all happened in issue number 1. So let's jump into issue number 2. To start off, we see Lee Price holding the case that he acquired in the previous issue, really going to confront the person that really owned it, and that would be the Black Cat. So as he walks into the penthouse, he kind of meets with the Black Cat, who's got Matt Gargan over her shoulder. She's got her other henchman in the background, and they kind of start a dialogue based on what happened and why things happened. So it's just like, hey, things went sideways. Your business partner tried to kill everybody and tried to take all the merchandise without paying. I reclaimed it, and I tried to decide what to do with it. And they're like, well, it took you an entire day, so what did you do during that period of time? And Lee Price has got a really good answer. He was thinking. And how was he thinking? He was actually having an internal mental struggle that's portrayed across a series of pages with Venom the Symbiote. So the Symbiote, being a strong psychological presence, tries to go toe-to-toe with Lee Price, and they have this kind of dialogue, very confrontational dialogue. This is clearly not a partnership that either of them wants. Well, Lee Price wants it, but Venom doesn't really like the person that Lee is. So as they kind of have this showdown and throwdown inside Lee Price's mind, basically they represent the entire fight as an actual physical confrontation, even though Lee is just sitting there in a chair contemplating all these things inside his head. It's a really cool kind of concept, but what it does is it sets up the next series of events, because as we see things move forward with Black Cat, we actually see Venom kind of show up, not necessarily as a symbiote, but as a kind of like a ghostly figure on Lee Price's shoulder, giving him information and insight into these situations based off of its previous knowledge. So it's kind of that conflict-y situation where they're going about their dialogue. It's just like, hey, I don't want to work for these people. What are you doing? And that's what Venom's doing. He's giving insight on Matt Gargan. It's just like, hey, that's a really bad guy. And it's just, it's really kind of fun to see Venom as this kind of third-person kind of mental construct that is inside Lee Price's head and that is kind of interacting with him in real time. Only Lee Price can hear him. It's kind of cool. I really like the way that it's set up. But what we find is that even though Lee has kind of locked him out of his higher brain function so he can't take control of his body, he does have some control over involuntary responses, which ultimately ends up with Lee leaving with a bucket. Black Cat, of course, doesn't really want to stay in a place where somebody is hurled up their insides into a bucket, so, she assigns one of her hench people to kind of go get herself a new suite, and as Lee leaves, he's kind of tagged by a few different federal officers that are there monitoring Black Cat's operations. We then get to a little bit more in-depth dialogue between Lee and Venom as they kind of walk down the alley, because Lee is kind of relaying his plans to Venom. Venom's just like, hey, you want to be a crime boss? He's like, nah, man, bosses get pinched. I want to be one of the higher-up guys that continually gets paid, that has those expectations. I don't want to be the face of, crime. I just want to be the guy that gets paid, gets what's done. And the only way that I can do that is if people don't know I have you. So that's where he's trying to keep everything kind of quiet. But he can't really keep things quiet because Tombstone has sent Firebug to take care of him by basically burning down his entire apartment. And if we know anything about Venom, Venom doesn't like fire. He doesn't like Sonics, he doesn't like fire. So Lee has no choice but to unleash Venom on Firebug, which ultimately causes them to come crashing down inside the alley as his apartment burns, and then the federal agents come and they kind of end up in conflict with Venom and Lee. So Venom number 2 is a really interesting book. I like this. I will say that up front. I like the way that this story is told. Not necessarily because I like the portrayal of Venom. I like the idea behind it. Because Lee is a very, military or trained person. He's got a very dedicated psyche. He's very cold. He's very calculating. He's very emotionless. He doesn't really have that kind of drive to save people that Flash Thompson did. He doesn't have that kind of anger or rage that Eddie Brock did. He's a very cold and calculating individual that has a purpose, and he's moving forward towards that purpose. Whereas the Venom symbiote has kind of faced salvation recently. It no longer has those kind of villainous urges. It's had a taste of being an agent of the cosmos and a hero with the Guardians of the Galaxy, as he was partnered with Flash Thompson, and he understands that, but he's not necessarily the person in charge in this situation. So Gerardo Sandoval's art is really kind of cool. It's a little bit edgy, it's a little bit stylized, but I think that it really works for this kind of situation. It's not necessarily my favorite portrayal of Venom because there's so much constant shape changing and things like that, but that's something that's evolved over Venom's history, and you can see that in the evolution of Venom. But it's definitely something that fits with this kind of storytelling and the kind of perspective that we're going on, especially when you get to like the little ghostly Venoms. It's very much a cool concept to see the host in very clear conflict with the actual symbiote, and the symbiote trying to be a force for good and the host being a force for himself. So, who is going to win out in this ultimate conflict between these two characters? And that's the most interesting part of the book for me. I think that Venom number 2 is a very strong second issue that's going to give people a much clearer direction as to where things are headed, and I think the direction's a good one. So definitely one that I'd recommend you pick up. So that's my review of Venom number 2, but I want to know what you guys think, so hit me up in the comments down below and we can start that conversation. As always, if you like what you see, hit the like button. Don't forget to subscribe right there to get more news, reviews, and commentary on comic books, comic book movies, comic book TV shows and games, and anything and everything inside the world of comics.